Hello, everybody. My name is Graham Elwood, and you are watching Baboom, the political vigilante, bringing you truth from the outskirts of Gotham. Even if you don't agree with it and you think I'm not a true lefty, it's still what I believe, so suck it. So today is January 6th, 2022, and a year ago today was the Capitol insurrection. And I wanted to talk about it because in typical sort of American fashion, we can only talk about it in one way or the, you know what I mean? Like this very complicated country with a bunch of different people with a bunch of different ideas has been deliberately polarized into red and blue. And so you have to either have a red or blue take on January 6th. And it's a significant thing. And I don't think it should be downplayed any way, shape, or form. It shouldn't be downplayed, but then it also shouldn't, like this is from, I don't know what Primo Radical is, but this is legitimately dumbest shit I've ever happened in the history. These are everybody, they did a candlelight vigil on the steps of the Capitol in light of, now this is, I mean, yes, people died. It was awful. I don't know. Like this is, again, just seems more like the theatrics of this country, but then I don't want to go too, I don't want to take too much of this. I don't know. I'm so conflicted because then there's so many questions I have about this, and I because it was why weren't there enough cops there? Why was this allowed to happen? If this would have been a Black Lives Matter protest storming the Capitol, they would have had a whole like battalion of soldiers there and helicopters and tanks and tear gas. It would have been nuts. But it is an insane thing that happened, and it can't just be dismissed either. So I don't know. I'm very sort of, I have very sort of conflicted about it, quite honestly. So I wanted to bring on the show a host of Get Your News On with Ron Placone. Ladies and gentlemen, Ron Placone. Ron, how are you today?
Hey, Graham. What's up? January 6th.
January 6th. So,
I mean, look, man, and I hear what you're saying. I'm not trying to downplay anything, but we are failing in the industrialized world miserably. We are completely failing. We have just given up. There is a catastrophe throughout the country. I'm wearing a t-shirt for Nashville today because Nashville's suffering. In Washington, D.C. itself, there are people who have been stranded for 20 hours. And our government today decided to have a musical. They decided to get the cast to Hamilton and have a fucking musical. There's people stranded literally down the street. They've been stranded for 20 hours. The people in charge. Hey, we're going to have a musical. The cast from Hamilton's here. Hey, even Tim Kaine is among the people stranded. Tim Kaine himself. Tim Kaine, Hillary's running mate. Which, by the way, how irrelevant is Tim Kaine? So irrelevant that even on a show called The Political Vigilante in the United States, I feel compelled that if I mention Tim Kaine to say Hillary's running mate. He needs that qualifier. Whenever you hear the name Tim Kaine, the only appropriate response is to go, who? And then roll your eyes. That's it. But that guy, they're just having a musical. We're going to have a musical. Is a helicopter going to go get Tim Kaine, just pick him up, get him out of his car, be like, we don't want Tim to miss the musical. He's just up above going, sorry, America, I got places to be. Hey, does anyone know how to say thoughts and prayers in Spanish? Like, what the hell, dude? We live in a dystopian hellscape.
Oh, it is so insane because even our reactions, the government's reactions to something significant is still ridiculous. Like, I mean, because I think when I hear people try to downplay what happened at the Capitol, even people who are like, well, I was there. Well, you were around this area and not everyone was a crazy Nazi. They just felt like the election was stolen. Okay. But I still have a hard time I can't minimize it because there were people with AR-15s that were, some of them were wearing Camp Auschwitz shirts, or 6 million wasn't enough. They were armed neo-Nazis that wanted to kill people, including Mike Pence. And it did happen. I mean, like, it did happen. People died.
Yeah, I mean, people died. Like, no one can dispute that. Like, that happened. Like, people died there.
People died there. And, you know, I mean, I've even joked about it in my act. I'm like, this country can't even do a revolution correctly. Like, again, a year ago, when I was watching this, I was like, holy shit. I go, oh my God, they're going to seize control of the government. Trump's going to go, I'm still president. And they're either going to kill people in Congress and the Senate, or they're just going to hold them hostage and say, we've got control of government now. And there's going to be a huge stalemate, and some, you know, the National Guard's going to roll out, but some of the National Guard's going to join. I mean, because I know enough about how coups work, and this is how they happen. But I was like, this country couldn't even do a fucking coup correctly. They went there, they broke in, and they took selfies in a podium. So it's like they couldn't even do that correctly. And then, you know, we find out the head of the Oath Keepers, the head of the Proud Boys were FBI informants. So this very much had the markings of like the FBI was maneuvering people, which again, then people go, oh, so the whole thing, it wasn't an insurrection. It was it's a scam. No, you can't go too far in that direction either. Because again, two things can be true at the same time, which is we have a lot of heavily armed, dangerous neo-Nazi organizations in this country that many of them were there on January 6th, and the FBI knows how to stir them up. And obviously it felt very stirred up. The fact that no military or extra cops were deployed felt very like they knew this was going to happen. It seems like kind of orchestrated, or at the very least, they heard the chatter. They knew it was going to happen. They said, let's just let this happen. Like, no cops, no National Guard were deployed. None of that. If this was a Black Lives Matter protest, I mean, there would have been 300 people would have been died. They would have just opened fire on them. If Black Lives Matter people stormed the Capitol with AR-15s, people would have gone fucking bananas. So I don't want to get caught in either two. I don't want to minimize what happened because it's serious. And when people try to, it's just a handful of bad, you know, when I hear even like lefties like try to minimize it, I'm like, wait a minute. Armed neo-Nazis are a dangerous threat in this country. Let us not forget the Oklahoma City bombing. Timothy McVeigh, he was a white nationalist. He was falling through, I forget the name of it. There's this like book, this like neo-Nazi doctrine that they all follow. And he was they want to start this like race war in America, right? That's what Oklahoma City was. And there's been a lot of arrests and of neo-Nazi organizations that wanted to carry out domestic terrorism. They tried to kidnap the governor of Michigan. This shouldn't be minimized. But then I see the goddamn government, like you say, hold candles and hold a musical while there's people stuck in traffic. There's people starving. Like the climate collapse is going to kill all of us.
And again, like you said, it's okay for two things to be true at the same time. And we live in such a hyper tribal, one tweet at a time society that it's like, that's almost not okay. But you know what? On shows like this, it's okay to actually call something for what it is. And it's okay to say, yeah, we're not trying to minimize this. People got killed. It was certainly a serious thing. On the same note, it's okay to roll your eyes at someone like Chuck Schumer when he starts comparing it to frickin' Pearl Harbor. You know what I mean? It's like, yes, both of those things can be true at the same time. You don't have to pick one or the other.
Yeah. And that's just so that Chuck Schumer saying that just typifies how dumb our government really is. Like literally, I've started dropping videos on TikTok and Instagram on how the government, both parties are like having a really awful roommate. Like, you know, this candlelight vigil. And he said, this is worse than Pearl Harbor. No, it wasn't worse than Pearl Harbor. 4,000 people died at Pearl Harbor. Like that was awful. I mean, come on. They decimated our Pacific fleet. In the middle, the World War II was already underway. So it's insane to me. And again, like this country, like when they start, like when they took over the Capitol in Michigan during the pandemic, they weren't mad that they didn't have that people were dying because they didn't have healthcare in the middle of a pandemic. They're not, they're mad that they couldn't wear masks and get a haircut. Like America is so misguided and propagandized. Even the shit it really like when people took to the streets for George Floyd, that was value. I mean, that needed to happen. Some of it went out of control, and I'm not in favor of riots or anything, but I understand that. But then, and let's not minimalize this. This was like 99% of the people at the Capitol a year ago were white. I mean, this was white people, it was almost all white people. And Black Lives Matter protests, you've been to them, I've been to them, they're everybody. I mean, especially since George Floyd, they got way more white people joined in and were like, wait a minute, we got to do something. So I know.
And you can even see, I mean, we all saw it. We all saw those photos. I mean, you could look at the security details they had when it was a Black Lives Matter protest near the Capitol compared to when it was January 6th. I mean, it was night and day. I mean, that they were armed to the gills for Black Lives Matter. And then for January 6th, it was just shrug. And so, yeah, I mean, and then, some of the other more, I'm trying to think of like the right way to put it, like some of the more quote patriotic responses to this are also, in my opinion, very cringe. Like, oh, people tried to hijack our democracy, blah blah blah. It's like, well, what are you talking? I mean, look, I'm not advocating what happened that day at all, but to make it out like we have some sacred democracy or this is some great system we have in place that like, oh, they were messing with our great system. And this is such like people try to put it front and center. Like that particular event is the reason we're in this mess that we're in now. And it's like, no, nowhere like that's absolutely absurd. That is beyond absurd. And my guess, and this is just a guess, I might end up being wrong because I'm not really basing this off of anything other than a hunch. But my hunch is that this is what Democrats are going to run on in the midterms. They are just going to run on Trump is bad and January 6th. And it is not going to work at all. At all.
Yeah. I think that's such a great point. Is this? It was a huge stain on the sanctity of our democracy. It's like, wait a minute, like, did the Democrats cheat in the last election? Yeah. So did the Republicans. That was the other thing. It was like both parties cheat. They gerrymander. They rig vote. I mean, the Republicans go out of their way to stifle votes in Black and brown communities. The Democrats make sure progressives don't get close. I mean, it's just like the sanctity of our election. And then it's like, when I hear that sanctity of our democracy crap, I'm like, what about all the democratically elected politicians the CIA went in and overthrew because that guy wouldn't give up the resources of that country to American corporations? I mean, like, that's the other thing where I'm like, don't give me this sanctity of the democracy crap, from a country that is still bombing the shit out of poor countries today as we speak. And we're sanctioning, which is an act of warfare. I mean, you've got look what the IMF has done to countries. I mean, like on down the line, what we've done. So it's hard for me to sit there and go, wait, I can't, anyone's outrage on this. I'm always like, yeah, but we got to do something about these neo-Nazi terrorist organizations. Yeah, we absolutely should. Oh, and by the way, Operation Paperclip, we brought a bunch of Nazis after World War II to this country to help with our space program. Oh, by the way, just Germany said never again, and they actually meant it and did it and can give proof of that. That's why they don't have the neo-Nazi problem that we have. And again, nationalism always spikes when there's a financial crisis, when people are having, and this is happening throughout the world because the neoliberal globalization has stuck in it. Like working class people throughout the world are just fed up. I mean, what's happening in Kazakhstan, they're one of the top oil exporters in the world, and their government just doubled the price and people took to the streets. I mean, so I know I'm kind of going all over the place, but like,
it's because it's a tough line to walk. And it's a challenging line to walk, and it's not a line to walk that, I mean, and it's not something anyone ever masters, you know, like every time you just do your best. But it's one of those things where you have to recognize that, yes, there are like so many despicable things in the country right now, neo-Nazis and these extremist militias and stuff like that. On the same note, let's not lose sight of the system that really creates more of this stuff. And let's not make it out. I mean, it's the powers that be would love you to think that, oh, well, it's just because of these despicable ideologies that we have the problems we have. And it's like, no, it's not that simple. These ideologies are absolutely despicable, of course, but part of the reason they're around is because of a despicable system that breeds them, and in many cases combines with them. When Hitler rose to power in Germany, things were not great there. Things were really bad. They were decimated from World War One, and I mean,
and the global depression. There was
the global depression. And so when you look at human history, whenever you have a complete desperate populace, that's when people cling to this fringe extremist ideology. That's what happens 100% of the time. So you have to walk that line where it's like, you can't excuse this stuff. You can't, you know, like the terrible circumstances of the United States right now is not an excuse for someone to go out and be a Nazi. Of course not. That's absolutely absurd. But on the same note, like you can't just make it out like, oh, the system's fine. It's just these bad actors. Like, no, the system isn't fine. And that's why bad actors are multiplying.
Yeah. And it's such a, I mean, to watch the corporate media, especially CNN and MSNBC, they're like, oh, this fake news media is stirring this up. And they're just trying to blame it all on Fox. And Fox is obviously awful. But CNN, holy shit. CNN acts like Trump just appeared out of nowhere. They fucking propped him up, man. They mean, the Les Moonves, the head of CBS, said the ratings increased because of, you know, Trump made better ratings. I mean, you and I and everyone on our sphere talked about how in the 2016 campaign, they left a Bernie Sanders speech with all these populist platforms for an empty podium where Trump was going to appear. I mean, the media is so, they act like this just happened out of nowhere. They're so complicit, not to mention, and no one is talking about the things you and I are touching on, but let's get into it a little deeper here, of working class. The working class has been completely dismantled in this country, and America is in class warfare and nobody knows it or acknowledge it, or the ruling elites have done a very good job of keeping people distracted, thinking it's red, blue, black, white, whatever, rather than the fact that, you know, had people storm the Capitol because they're like, we're sick of these billionaires not paying taxes. We're sick of them, you know, sex trafficking children and no one's held accountable. I would have been down with it. I mean, I would have been like, all right, great. Like, I don't want to watch another cock rocket fly around the planet using tax dollars while there's people waiting in line for food. And so that's the other thing too, that the corporate media just refuses to acknowledge. And the Chuck Schumers of the world, a lot of that, well, some of the January 6th is just outright racism, which is dangerous and scary and despicable. But some of it is just like, we've been abandoned. That's the thing that neoliberal left refuses to acknowledge about one of the reasons that helped get Trump elected was he actually talked populism. It's right populism. It had xenophobia and racism and sexism in it, but he still said, I'm going to bring your job back. He was giving speeches in front of closed factories saying, I'm going to bring your job back, while Hillary was doing whatever, 50,000 a plate dinners or whatever she was doing. Yeah. And there's a lot of people who've been completely screwed over. I mean, we are in, all this desperation. You get, 90,000 people die a year from the opioid epidemic. That is decimated communities, not just urban, like rural communities. I mean, like Ohio, middle of the country places are wiped out. And
well,
we have to acknowledge that.
Totally, man. And I would make the argument, and I have made this argument, and I've been making it for years, that really, at the end of the day, when you actually look at what populism is in the history of it, which the best way to do that, read The People Know by Thomas Frank. That is the best history of populism that lays out what populism actually is, what it's actually about. That concept has really been hijacked, especially over the past 5 years. And I would make the argument that the whole idea of right-wing populism, it's a myth. It's like dry water. Like, it's not really a thing, because the whole idea of populism is just doing that which benefits the working class, doing that which benefits society as a whole, and kind of gives everyone a fair shake. That's why it's populism, population. So this whole idea, like right wing, which benefits those with the most, it benefits with the elite that have the money, that have the power. How can that coincide with populism? It really can't. I think at the end of the day, what it actually is it's actually just scapegoating nationalism. That's all it really is. The whole idea of right-wing populism is more like, oh no, it's the immigrants' fault that your job's gone. And so I'm all about you. I'm all about you. So these immigrants, we're gonna make their life difficult because I'm all about you and your job. Would you say, what about your job? We'll figure that out later. First, we got to get rid of the immigrant because I'm for you, the working man. That's all. It's nonsense. It's just
Yeah,
nonsense.
it's a good point, because it's like when the right says that nationalist, and it's like I always want to tell them, an immigrant didn't steal your job, a billionaire did. A billionaire stole your job. A billionaire wanted to make more profits, so they took your job where you were making, whatever, $35-$40 an hour, making union wages, and they shipped it overseas for $1 a day so that they could have a bigger jet. That's why you lost your job. And that's the thing too. You make a great point about how it's just right populism is just a nice term for nationalism. So yeah, I mean, there's all these issues that January 6th, and again, typical of America, they just want it to go away. Like, America just wants to, like, well, we got it was like when Biden's elected, so problem solved, and yes, was it Merrick Garland has said that over 700 people have been arrested and prosecuted in connection to January 6th, and more people are being arrested. It's like, okay, I mean, maybe they'll finally go after these domestic terrorist organizations. But it's not like everybody else just gave up their guns and said, yeah, we were wrong, we're sorry. Like, I mean, I just talked about it 2 days ago with John Updike from Open Primaries about how do we avoid civil war. January 6th looked very much like the start of one. And, when you're living in the middle of a timeline, it doesn't seem like things happen quickly. But I always bring up the Boston Massacre, which was when British soldiers killed a bunch of people protesting the British government in Boston. That happened. And, in a history book, it's like the Boston Massacre, the Tea Party, and then the Revolution, bing, bang, boom. It's like, well, there was a 2-year time span between the Boston Massacre and the actual start of the American Revolution.
Right.
So is January 6th, my question to you, Ron, I mean, with all these prosecutions that they're doing, but then this ridiculous, like, candlelit vigil musical crap while Americans are hungry and they're not, Joe Biden is like, his last couple speeches about, COVID are just like, I don't know, figure it out yourself.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like,
Google it.
Google it.
Go on Google. Go on Google.
I mean, we're still Omicron is going nuts. We have the hospitals are about 78% capacity. I mean, we're not out of this at all.
Well, isn't it amazing? They teamed up with Google now. They teamed up with Google to help people find testing locations, which is not going well, by the way. Like, it's not going great. And before that, they had teamed up some with, I believe, Walmart, and I forget if there was another product. Definitely Walmart was one of them. And as soon as their contract expired, what did Walmart do? They raised the prices of COVID tests and N95 masks. They raised the prices. In other industrialized countries, tests are either free or at most they're like $1 because they cost 80 cents to make. And places that have universal health care, the concern is actually that health. So tests are widely available. They're everywhere. Here, you can't get them. And they're like $15 if you're lucky. And now they're getting higher, not lower. It's absolutely nuts. And it's to the point where I don't think it's fair or accurate. I mean, we're talking about like things that just aren't really a thing that we should stop saying. Right wing populism is one of those things. Another thing, honestly, and I'm not even trying to make a joke here, the United States is not a country. Like it is genuinely not a country. Like that's unfair to countries that are actually being countries right now. And I know like a lot of places aren't doing great right now. We're not totally unique, but holy shit, do we set a bar. We are a corporation with residency statuses. That's what we are. That is literally what we are. Because who are they teaming up with? Google, Walmart. And then who does Google, Walmart report to? Nobody. They do whatever they want. They just raise the frickin' prices. Walmart did. I mean, that is nuts. Like, you have to take a step back and realize how nuts that is. And like, how bad could it get? I mean, honestly, the answer to your question is it very well possibly could be. I sincerely hope not, but it really depends on what happens over the next 3 to 5 years. I was reading this thing from a Canadian scholar where he basically, and this was like an academic who studies social movements, like this is this guy's life's work. And he was saying there's a chance that the US could completely collapse in the next 5 to 10 years. He wasn't saying it's for sure going to happen, but he was saying there's a valid chance that like the rest of the world sees it. Like, I think we're still sort of in this bubble where it's like, we're the good old USA. We'll pull through. Listen to the Charlie Daniels song. No, man. Like, like, we will be no different than any other freaking empire. And like, people around the world are predicting, because the reason he was writing about it is because he's in Canada. And he was saying, what do we do? How do we get ready? We have a damn shitty neighbor who's been shitty forever. They're about to get even shittier potentially. How do we prepare? Like, they were asking these questions. Like, do we let people in? Like, what do we do? Like, will there be political refugee status from people in the United States? How will that be qualified? What do we do as Canada? Those are questions they are pondering right now up in Canada, and they freaking should be.
And they're pondering it in Mexico as well.
Yeah.
And Mexico's probably like, yeah, you can keep that wall up. That's fine.
No shit.
You know?
No shit.
I mean,
they might even actually say, you know what? We will pay for it. We've talked it over. We've talked it over. We'll pay for it.
Because I don't think, and I've talked, I don't think Americans understand. It thinks like, well, our institutions will, our democracy is different than those other countries that collapsed, and we'll preserve. And, that's why we just lit candles, and, we've a congressional inquiry, and, justice will be served, and this will never happen again. I mean, Biden's approval rating is awful, as is Kamala Harris's. And what, the Democrats are going to lose in the midterms. I mean, they're going to lose in the midterms because their approval rating's done. And this country's been so propagandized to just think Americans will just go, well, today my life is not good. Who's in the White House? That party's the problem. I'll vote for the other party and it'll get better. I mean, Americans just keep doing that. They just keep.
Yeah.
And
we're the United States of amnesia. They rely, and that's how the Democrats and Republicans rely on each other.
Yes.
Like, when you look at the actual GOP and you realize just how grotesque their ideas are, like it is literal textbook neo-fascism. Like, they're freaking nuts. I mean, and you right. See people like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, and you're like, oh my, these are super villains. But then you look at, well, the GOP is allowed to exist because of how ineffective the Democrats are. Because they are completely useless in every way. They are a neoliberal platform themselves. So, I mean, the only difference between neoliberalism and neo-fascism is neoliberalism is not as like concrete in your face. And it just sort of is laissez-faire while things drift into neo-fascism. There's your checks and balances. We go from neoliberalism to neo-fascism, and nothing. It's like they pull you back just before it gets too brutal, but then they just drift back there because that's what neoliberalism does. And then you're supposed to pick between these two things. And if you say, hey, in a way, this isn't a choice at all because this leads to this 100% of the time, then you're the crazy one. You're the freaking crazy one. Although the rest of the world, the rest of the industrialized world has figured that out. That's why their political situations, well, far from perfect, are way better than ours. We make Boris, especially right now, we are making Boris Johnson, who is despicable, but we are making him look like a fucking Boy Scout right now.
I know.
Boris Johnson, the guy who, compared to the rest of the EU, and I know England's not in the EU anymore because of Brexit, but like surrounding countries, I mean, they're considered like the far right, like, oh yeah, in England, they're kind of nuts there. We make him look like a fucking Boy Scout.
I know. And I don't think Americans understand this because they think, oh, we'll get out, we'll pull out. It's like, no, this is what a collapsing empire looks like. And I mean, I did a video. I mean, the stuff that led up to Yugoslavia collapsing, I mean, you could probably trace it back to the 1100s or whatever, but it really legit started in the 80s. It started a good 10, 15 years prior. I mean, same thing with Syria. I mean, like all this stuff leads up, it builds up and builds up and builds up. And there's this little like release valve kind of brings it down a little bit, but then it's Americans are all set to pop again. Yeah. I mean, all it's going to take is more economics. When people can't pay their bills, I mean, what's happening? I mean, all it's going to take is something that just happened in Kazakhstan. Like something just happens and they go, oh, gas is $10 a gallon. People are going to go, what? Or there was just a fire that just burned through a whole town in Colorado. I mean, not to mention the climate, what we just keep having. We had all those tornadoes.
We can't handle snowstorms anymore.
Yeah, we can't handle snowstorms.
We can't handle them. Like we're not equipped to handle them anymore. And they're, they're happening with climate change and they're happening in places that aren't used to them.
And when everything starts collapsing, Americans, we have Mexico and Canada. And then, so Canada, like you say, they're already having conversations. Like Canada dealt with it when COVID first hit and the riots and everything, and people were trying to leave. Canada was shutting its borders. Yeah. Canada was stopping people from like Seattle taking their boats up into like, they were like, and they're ready. They're getting ready now. They're literally, I'm sure they've got a plan in place of like, well, we got to line the border with our troops so that Americans don't flood in here because Canada's a country of what, 30 million people? They can't handle 20 million refugees. They can't handle it. And
they do have a lot of space though. I mean, I don't know. I mean, just in case we're all in that situation at some point. I mean, they have like what? How many lakes?
Yeah.
If we all could come up with suits that like have built-in heaters and somehow this like wouldn't suffocate us.
And
there's a chance.
Yeah. Jokes aside, when millions of Americans try to get into Canada, they're going to hate us. There's going to be a very serious, because countries there's racism towards refugees. So they're going to hate us. Mexico is going to be like, you've been treating us like a fucking dirty dog bitch for decades. Fuck you. Fuck you. And then what? We're going to get on boats and go in the Gulf and try to go to all those countries in the Caribbean. People are going to get on boats and try to. That's what's going to happen because that's what refugees have been doing all over the world. When there's a chaos, and if America erupts into a civil war, and everyone's just fighting with each other, and the government collapse, and Chuck Schumer's having a candlelight vigil, whatever, and Pelosi's
they'll kneel somewhere. They'll all go. They'll all kneel at the Capitol.
And wearing a dashiki or whatever.
Yeah, like the cast of Hamilton will be there. Well, there's a civil war going on.
It's like. I don't think Americans and then like all the Second Amendment people got to have your guns and all the lefties that got guns. Everyone's got a gun. Okay. You're describing a fucking hellscape. You are describing Mad Max. You are describing, and I don't care how many guns you got and you live off the grid and someone will come burn your house. Like it's going to be awful. And Americans don't realize it's already awful. You've got tent cities everywhere. People dying because they don't have health insurance. You've got all this stuff that was bad before the pandemic that's been exacerbated as a result of the pandemic.
Well, yeah, and that we realized how fragile our society is. I mean, we realized like this for years. I mean, pretty much for both of our lifetimes, really. The United States is just like a rubber band that's been being pulled to its breaking point, and this pandemic snapped that rubber band. Because it's like, I mean, clearly our society is clearly not meant to handle a pandemic. I mean, from everything from the destruction of test to, the fact that there are millions less people working in social services during a pandemic. Richard Wolff pointed that out years ago. I mean, capitalism is completely contradictory to any public health crisis, completely. And when you have no social safety net whatsoever, like we have here in the United States, we're seeing the conclusion of the experiment. This is the conclusion of the experiment. This is people came here, they kicked the people out who were here first, who were being stewards to the frickin' earth, and they decided, hey, we're going to have this experiment where pretty much anything goes. You are free as free can be, and you can do pretty much whatever you want, but we don't owe you anything, and society doesn't owe you anything, and let's see what happens. And some kind of interesting stuff happened. A lot of terrible shit, some kind of good stuff that probably would have happened anyway if we were more of a society. But nonetheless, stuff happened. And we're seeing the conclusion of said experiment. And that conclusion, by the way, is the same conclusion we've seen time and time again throughout human history. Capitalism doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It has never worked. It will never work. It doesn't work. If capitalism was a car, it would break down every 2,700 miles. We keep building back the lemon. That's what we keep doing.
Yeah, there's this perfect storm brewing in America. And I just, the money printing, we just printed how many trillions of dollars, and we're already in inflation. It's not like, well, inflation might hit. No, we're there. You've been to the grocery store. You know what the price is, what your grocery bill was like just from 6-7 months ago versus today, let alone a year ago or 2 years ago. You know what the price is at the pump. I mean, and the supply line issues, and you throw in, like you say, we bailed on social services. I mean, Omicron is also showing all the healthcare workers that quit during last summer, during Delta. They were like, we're done. I'm not doing this anymore. Like, we don't want to do this. They've walked out. They're just like fed up. They're burnt out. They can't watch any more unvaccinated people die and tell them they're not dying from COVID. I mean, like, they've had family members yell at them, like they've just been, they're trying to save someone's life, and then they're getting yelled at. Like, no one wants to deal with this anymore. And I don't think Americans realize, and because this guy wrote this interesting thing in this article, I think it was in Medium. He lived in Sri Lanka during the Civil War, and he goes, Americans are waiting for this big, like, thunderclap, like we're Civil War, it's a collapse or whatever. He goes, it just happens, and you just take it. Human beings and Americans are very adaptable, but almost to their own detriment, because then you don't go, holy shit, this is awful. And this guy talked about, he was living in Sri Lanka during the, I think it was in the late 90s, when they had an awful civil war. And he goes, it was just a part of life. You'd see like dead bodies. You'd see this street was cut down because of an explosion. You'd hear gunfire in the background, and then you'd go on a date and have coffee. And, I was showing videos of people living in Syria. Then they're out and about on the streets, and there's bombed out buildings and people displaced and refugees. But then there's people going to work and riding the bus. And it's just like, Americans are going to just.
Well, and yeah, that's not, what we have in the United States, at least not right now. But what we do have here, that I don't want to compare it to that, but it's sort of like, I guess, in that vein a little bit, is we have been conditioned to just expect absolutely nothing. Our initial reaction to government is distrust. And that's automatic. Now, we think that that's a universal thing, but we don't realize, and even I'm guilty of this, and so are you. I think it's kind of human nature. When you live in a place your entire life, I mean, some of it kind of rubs off on you. But you got to take a step back and realize that that actually isn't a universal thing. That's not to suggest other governments are flawless. Of course they're not. Nowhere is. But it's not a universal thing to automatically distrust any type of leadership and to be like, fuck this, I don't want to be anywhere near this. But our society has conditioned that to be the case. And a lot of this distrust is absolutely deserved, because we have a complete corporate coup for a government. That's a valid reaction and justified. So when you have that, and it's just sort of this dog eat dog thing, That's something that we passively accept. Like, yeah, it's not like a blown out building or something like that, but we just passively go through, oh, of course they're not going to give us any relief. Of course they're not going to do what a society should do when a pandemic happens. Of course that's not going to happen. Of course they could come up with how many billions for the Pentagon again. Meanwhile, you're going to tell me they can't get a basic website together for people to order tests. Somehow they can't do that. They couldn't pull that off. Websites, too hard. We have the most elaborate military might in the history of the frickin' world with an unlimited supply of money for it. Yet somehow, those things that we said we, quote, couldn't afford, turns out we can't afford them. We can totally afford to send people tests, by the way, because whatever they tell you, we can't afford things. They're just bullshitting you. But somehow can't get a functioning website. And this is by design. It's because they want you to expect nothing. They want Joe Biden to just chuckle at the idea of canceling student loan debt. He doesn't even know if he can do it. He's not even sure. He's like, I don't even know if I can do that. Yeah, you do know. And yes, you can. Yeah, he's supposed to chuckle at the idea of having universal health care. Do you think that would fly in Canada? In England, in Scotland, in Italy, in France, in Germany? It fucking wouldn't. But we just passively take it here because we're conditioned to do so. And again, I'm not saying those places don't have their own sets of problems. Of course they do. But there's certain things that we just kind of tolerate and we just kind of expect at this point that is not universal, and it's fucking warped and it's sick.
Well, those countries you've named have their problems, but their problems pale in comparison to what's happening here. And while we don't have bombed out buildings that we just walk by and accept, we have, like, across the street from the now crypto.com arena, formerly Staples Center in downtown Los Angeles, you have a giant high-rise building. It was supposed to be luxury apartments. It's half finished. They stopped construction 2 years ago because the money ran out. And that's all over LA, is either brand new buildings or buildings in the middle of being built. And right next to it is a tent city. And that's, Americans don't even see the insanity.
We're not even fazed by it. I mean, we're not even fazed by stuff like that. And I mean, hey, we're all guilty of that too. Like when you grow up in a place like this, especially if you live in a city like Los Angeles. I mean, do you know who Mel Telkarubne is? You've probably heard me talk about him. Or you've probably met him, you just don't remember. But he runs an organization called the Shower of Hope, which helps get homeless people showers. Yeah. And he's doing a new thing now. This is, I mean, it's awesome that he's doing this. It's absolutely terrible that this is a thing that has to exist. Talk about dystopian hellscape. He now has an organization, and I actually forget the title of it off the top of my head, but it's an organization that provides temporary housing for homeless college students in Long Beach. Because that's becoming so common, where it's like these college, they to be able to still go to school, they have to give up their home. So it's a program for houseless college students. So USA, but anyway, and
we're all programmed, Ron.
Yeah.
To go, that's totally acceptable. And then whatever, LeBron James gets $20 million and plays in this fancy arena that they just got a $700 million licensing deal with crypto.com for, and there's new high rises on every street. Like, nobody sees this as a problem. Everybody goes, oh, that, and hats off to these organizations and the people that donate to them. But basically, people that are donating to that, or somebody's GoFundMe for a surgery or medical treatment, is basically just a tax on people with good hearts. When who should be paying this is, no one thinks these billionaires and these corporations, or even these celebrities, these celebrity athletes. Like, I'm just like, who's paying? We applaud Jeff Bezos, and he's so wonderful. And isn't Mark Cuban great? These billionaires, those motherfuckers, and the federal government,
worst, dude.
They're the worst. And then I want to point this out too, real quick. You just talked about the military industry. I don't think in this, the media didn't cover this. The democratically controlled Congress, including 51 members of the Progressive Caucus, voted to give Biden $768 billion for his war budget. When it went to the Senate, which the Democrats also control, they ended up giving it an additional $10 billion that the military didn't even ask for.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
no
they
one's
do that all the
screaming about
time.
this.
Yeah, but they've done that time and time again. I mean, I think they did that once when Trump was in office too, at least
Yes.
once. I mean, and I
Yes.
think with Obama, they always do that. And then, but the reason I brought up Mel, other than that program, when I asked him, I'm like, "Well, what got you into all this activism? Like, what really spawned it?" He like, and I forget where he's from originally, but he had never seen tent cities the way we have it here in his life. Like, he's like, "I've seen poverty before, but I've never seen it like in the United States." And he was driving through Skid Row when he first moved to the United States. And he was just like blown away. Like, and he stopped and he got out of his car and he was going up to people and he's like, are you homeless? Do you have somewhere to go? And they were like, no. And he was just like, oh my God. Like, people thought something was wrong with him, but he was actually having the human reaction we should all have every day. And
Yeah.
I'm guilty of it too, man. I mean, it's just something, but for him as an adult, having never seen anything like that before, he was kind of like, what? We got to do something. And he has been doing things since, credit to him. But yeah, man, I mean, it's one of those things like we just passively accept why in the richest country in the world does anyone ever go to bed hungry? That's so grossly unacceptable. Does anyone not have a roof over their head? There's no reason for it, none whatsoever. But I mean, every day it's just a thing we walk by.
Every day. Ron Placone, where can people follow you online?
You can follow me online at Ron Placone on Twitter, ronplacone.com, where I got some tour dates coming up in the spring. I'm going up to Canada. I might even be looking for apartments. Who knows? No, but yeah, I got Pittsburgh, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, Burlington, Vermont, Portland, Maine, Boston, Mass, New York City. That's coming up in the spring. Grab your tickets now, ronplacone.com, at Ron Placone on Twitter, Ron Placone on YouTube and Rockfin. And Get Your News On with Ron will be back on January 10th. And you can find that on YouTube, Rockfin, Twitter, or the audio podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Just Get Your News On with Ron.
Boom, shalakalak. Well, get your news on with Ron and shave your knuckles for justice, buddy. Boom. Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching. We are still in our 9th month of demonetization from YouTube. So support what we're doing at patreon.com/Graham Elwood or rockfin.com/Graham Elwood, which is a blockchain cryptocurrency platform. It's free to sign up, and there's a premium level at $10 a month. And for that, you get everybody on the platform's premium content. Myself, Lee Camp, Ron Placone, Jimmy Dore, Whitney Webb, Kim Iverson, Abby Martin, and many, many others. You can also support what we're doing at Venmo at Graham-Elwood. And go to grahamelwood.com. We have a PayPal button and a PO box. I also have crypto wallets, which are all in the show notes. Thanks for supporting what we do.